Welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something huge happening on the world's oceans, a real shift in military power. We're digging into the sources on China's Navy, specifically how fast its carrier fleet is growing. Our focus, China's third carrier, the Fujian. It's nearly ready. We need to understand its tech, how China pulled this off, and frankly, what it means for stability and strategy, especially in the Pacific.
It's definitely a conversation we need to have. For ages, the U.S. Navy had more carriers than everyone else combined. That was the benchmark. Well, that's not the case anymore. And China, they're about to become the world's #2 carrier power. The speed of it all, it really demanded a closer look.
Okay, let's start with the facts on the ground, or on the water, I guess. The Type 003 Fujian, third carrier, second one they built themselves. And it's not some far-off plan. A Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman, Zhang Xiaogang, he basically said its commissioning will not be far away soon.
Yeah, and what's really striking is the capability jump. It's a massive ship, around 85,000 tons. Still conventionally powered, though. Not nuclear like the big U.S. carriers.
Yeah.
But the real story, the big leap, it's the successful testing of its electromagnetic catapults, that tech.
Right, hmAS. Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. For people who aren't familiar, why is that such a big deal compared to their older carriers?
Good question. So their first two carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, they use what's called a ski jump ramp. Aircraft basically take off under their own power. That limits how heavy they can be, how much fuel and weapons they carry, big limitations. hmAS uses powerful magnetic fields to, fling the aircraft off the deck. Very precise, very powerful. It means heavier planes, fully loaded. That's what lets you project real power far from home, is what modern supercarriers have.
And this is where it gets interesting, looking at the source material. We have confirmation, visual evidence even, that the Fujian has already launched its new J-35 fighter using these hmAS catapults during sea trials.
Exactly. Now compare that. Contrast it with the U.S. Navy's situation. The U.S. has hmAS on its newest carrier. The U.S. has Gerald R. Ford. But getting their advanced fighter, the F-35C, integrated, that's been tricky. Launching a stealth jet like that with hmAS is complex, needs very fine-tuned power control. So the sources suggest the U.S. Navy might not have that F-35C routinely launching off the Ford with hmAS until maybe next year, possibly even early 2027.
Okay, hold on. So China's new carrier is potentially operating its next-gen fighter with hmAS now, while the U.S. is still working out the kinks for the same capability maybe for another year or two. That timing, especially that 2027 date you mentioned, it keeps popping up in strategic discussions, doesn't it? Why is that year significant?
It is. That 2027 date. Well, quite a few analysts and reports point to it as the year China might feel it has the military muscle, the readiness to potentially make a move on Taiwan. So the fact that the Fujian's advanced tech is coming online now, before that potential window, and maybe even before the U.S. equivalent is fully sorted, it changes the risk calculation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests China's closing key gaps right when it might matter most for their strategic aims.
It's really quite something, going from basically zero carrier experience 20 years ago to having the world's second largest carrier fleet soon. And the Chinese Navy is already the biggest in the world by sheer number of ships. How did they learn so fast? Build up that knowledge?
It wasn't luck, and it wasn't overnight. It looks like a really calculated long-term strategy.
Yeah.
Two key steps, really. Buying the know-how. Beijing knew they couldn't just design one from scratch without understanding how these things actually work, so they bought it. The sources highlight two huge acquisitions. First one goes way back to the 80s. They bought an old Australian carrier, the hmAS Melbourne, that was being decommissioned, and they paid a huge amount for it, apparently. $1.4 billion, described as an unseemly amount for scrap. That tells you something right there.
So they weren't just after the steal. Did they know what they were really buying? The knowledge?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They were buying decades of operational design experience. Their engineers reportedly went over every inch of it. Catapults, arrestor wires, elevators. But here's the really clever part, according to the sources. Before they actually scrapped it around 94, they took the flight deck apart and rebuilt sections of it on land.
On land? Why?
For training. Gave their pilots a realistic, safe place to practice carrier landings and takeoffs for years. A land-based, non-floating carrier deck. Incredible foresight.
Wow. Using an old ship just for basic training like that, that's methodical.
Yeah.
So what was the next step? Getting their hands on something more modern. That brings us to the Varyag, right?
Exactly. The Great Leap Forward, as some called it. After the Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine ended up with this unfinished carrier, the Varyag, Kuznetsov class. A Chinese company bought the Hulk. Stripped down, no engines, no electronics, for reportedly just $20 million, the cover story. They were going to tow it to Macau and turn it into a floating casino.
Ah, yes, the famous casino story. A way to get around rules about selling military gear. What does that tell us about their methods?
It shows they're willing to play the long game, use unconventional tactics, even deception, to reach a strategic goal. And they did. The Hulk sat for a while, but eventually they towed it to Dalian, completely refurbished it, finished building it. That became the Type 001 Liaoning. By doing all that complex engineering, basically reverse engineering and finishing a massive Soviet carrier, they got the hands-on knowledge. Everything from welding to systems integration. That paved the way for their first homegrown carrier, the Shandong, and now the much more advanced Fujian.
So the Liaoning was like a training ship and a giant instruction manual all rolled into one. It seems pretty clear looking back that they wouldn't have this hmAS carrier today without buying, studying, and taking apart those two foreign ships first. They imported the expertise before they built it domestically.
Which leads us to the big question. Why? Why this enormous investment in carriers? It all comes down to wanting a true blue water navy.
And when we say blue water navy, what does that mean for the listener? What can it do?
It means operating far from your own coast. Sustained operations, deep oceans, projecting power globally. Carriers are the ultimate symbol and tool for that. The sources point to two main strategic drivers for China. First, just that, global power projection. Showing up on the world stage as a major maritime player. Second, and maybe more immediate, is securing their claims closer to home, particularly the South China Sea. It's resource-rich, strategically vital. Carriers give them the air power, the flexibility to assert control over that huge area.
And there's a deep historical context here, too, isn't there? The sources link this naval buildup to China's century of humiliation, that period from the 1800s up to 1949.
Absolutely. That period, especially defeats like the First Sino-Japanese War, taught a brutal lesson. You can't be a great power, you can't be secure without a strong navy. That historical memory, that sense of vulnerability, it directly fuels today's defense spending. It's seen as essential to prevent foreign interference from ever happening again.
It does create an interesting tension, though. China often references its own naval history, like Admiral Zheng, his voyages in the 15th century. The narrative there is trade, diplomacy, friendship. Very different from, say, European colonial expansion backed by navies.
And that's the ambiguity you see. They might point to Zheng He to frame their ambitions as peaceful, but the reality is an aircraft carrier is a tool of military power projection. Fundamentally, you don't build 3, potentially 4, maybe even 6 of these things just for handshakes and trade deals. The Fujian gives them scale. It means they can handle things like the South China Sea and start building a more global presence simultaneously.
So the message with the Fujian isn't just we have carriers, it's we have advanced carriers operating at the cutting edge.
It raises the stakes significantly. Its arrival fundamentally shifts the baseline for any strategic discussion about the Pacific. So let's leave you with this thought to chew on. Given the pace we're seeing, the sources suggest China might aim for, maybe 6 carriers by the mid-2030s? And there's talk the next one, the Type 004, could even be nuclear-powered. What does that kind of fleet mean for global power dynamics? For naval dominance, as we've known it, not just now, but in 10, 15 years as that fleet matures?
A critical question. The Fujian's influence is already being felt, and the discussion about the future balance of power is happening right now. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We hope you'll join us again soon as we continue to unpack complex topics. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the Geostrategic Podcast for more in-depth analysis on topics that shape our world. Stay informed, stay ahead, and stay tuned for the next episode.